America managed to dodge my nightmare scenario this week against all the polling and against the odds. The nightmare scenario, you will recall, was for an intensely close election, the resolving of which would take up to weeks, with legal challenges and conspiracy theories flying around the place, which would probably end whichever side won, with a large proportion of the other side, the losing side, believing passionately that the election had been stolen from them. In the event, the result was clear and unambiguous. Trump won the swing states, he won the popular vote, Republicans won the Senate, almost certainly going to win the House. No ifs, no buts. America knows who Donald Trump is, arguably unlike 2016, and yet a bigger majority voted for him, including more women, more Latinos, more black people than had ever voted for him before. It turns out that celebrity endorsements don't swing elections. Who'd have thought? When Joe Biden went to his first international summit in 2020, and announced that America's back, baby, he was arguing that Trump 2016 was an aberration and that politics as usual had been resumed. But he was wrong. Trump, whatever you think about him, has majorly shifted the political character of the United States in ways, at least some of which are now likely to endure well beyond his coming term in office. Even if, and it's the most likely scenario, there's something of a backlash against some of the aspects of Trumpism by the time we get to 2028, much by then will have come to define how the US does politics. In the meantime, the Democrats have to get over the reality of their crushing defeat and hopefully, learn some lessons. It may be that this will be the event that finally buries wokeness and brings the left back into a more mainstream common sense area of political discourse. That will take time, for sure, and in the meantime they have to point fingers at each other and play the blame game. So, according to insider accounts, the Harris and Biden camps are already furiously tearing lumps out of each other. Biden's top aides Mike Donilon and Steve Ricchetti are being blamed for having had Biden run at all for a second term. Mike and Steve will have a lot to answer for having him run for re-election at 80 years old. A member of the Harris team told Axios the 107-day Harris campaign was nearly flawless. The Biden campaign that preceded it was the opposite. Yeah, I wouldn't quite go with nearly flawless, to be honest. I've noted a few of the flaws over the last couple of months, but that to one side, they do have a point. Biden staffers reportedly hit back, saying things like, "How did you spend $1 billion and not win? What the F?" Personally, I take some comfort from the fact that elections aren't purely decided by whoever has the most money to spend. Critics of Harris's campaign are saying that it was undermined by internal confusion and a lack of clear decision-making hierarchy. My impression is that both sides are wrong, lacking the needed perspective that will only come once the dust has settled. The fact is that Americans were pissed off with the impacts on their lives from inflation. They were worried about the culture war stuff, the alienation of young men from having positive places in society, the idea of weird gender stuff being imposed on their children. That last one, the trans issue, played particularly well for Trump. They tested out the advert they produced with the tagline, "Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you." It performed so well in testing that his campaign were reportedly stunned and made sure to get it out widely across all the swing states. It highlighted how Democrats just don't talk like ordinary people. Not only did they talk differently, but they scolded you if you didn't do likewise, and they would punish even children who didn't fit what seemed to be strange and ever-changing rules. Ezra Klein, who is one of the liberal commentators worth listening to, as one of the few who dared to speak up about Biden's obvious unfitness to run way before anyone else dared to, getting a lot of pushback from his own people for doing so, he added this: "I do think a lot of Democrats have alienated themselves from the culture that many people, and particularly many men, now consume. I think they lost people like Joe Rogan, by rejecting them, and it was a terrible mistake." Which is a good point. Joe Rogan was, after all, endorsing Bernie Sanders only 4 years ago, but he was treated by Democrats as a pariah. Trump went onto his podcast, J.D. Vance went onto his podcast, Kamala Harris did not. Ultimately, Trump campaigned on issues that affected most Americans, such as the economy and immigration. Whether you agree with his message or not on those issues, they were key issues for large numbers of voters. The Democrats did what, in recent years, the Democrats have often done: packaged up their target audiences and told them what they think they wanted to hear. The biggest group amongst those was women generally, who they talked to specifically about abortion. And it's true, women did care about abortion in this election, but with that issue having been pushed to the states, there were a number of places where abortion was literally separately on the ballot, which meant that women could split their vote for abortion rights at the same time as actually voting for Trump. And some of them did just that in states like Arizona, where there were abortion measures on the ballot and they outperformed Kamala Harris. As for the other groups, black people, Latinos, LGBT people, Trump did better with those groups than he had done before, because he was talking about things that affected them, such as inflation and American jobs and all of those things. Maybe you think, and there are good arguments for this, that what he was saying on those issues was magical thinking at best. He was unlikely to actually be able to deliver on any of them. But that wasn't the counter-argument that Harris's campaign was particularly effectively making. They were instead too busy calling him a threat to democracy, a convicted felon, and in the last week, full-on Nazi fascist. As noted here before, it was messaging that didn't land when the Biden campaign did it, and it was puzzling why they defaulted to it at the end of the Harris campaign. And the other point is that people were just fed up of incumbents and wanted change, something we've seen across the world. Kamala Harris had started off positioning herself as the change candidate, being as both Trump and Biden had been in office. But then she went on The View, and when she was asked what she would have done differently to Biden, she said she couldn't think of anything. Reportedly, Trump advisors were jumping for joy at that point. I use the J word advisedly. I don't think it was actually copyrighted. They were stunned she didn't have a good answer to an obvious question. They used that clip in as much advertising and social media as they possibly could. But Team Harris, meanwhile, thinks they ran a near-flawless campaign. Yeah. Some of her supporters have been making exactly the same mistakes when it's coming to making up excuses for why they lost. Will a woman ever be US president? One newspaper columnist agonized, and others pitched in, saying Harris didn't win purely because of misogyny and racism. Post-Barack Obama, this is a weird holding on to grievance politics. Obama was elected because he didn't bang on about the fact he was black, certainly not in his first election. He spoke to people in terms of universal themes about aspiration for the future, and he was good at it. For race and sex not to be an issue, you have to stop banging on about it. In the UK, the left habitually labelled the Conservative Party similarly as racist and sexist. But the Conservative Party recently elected a black woman as its leader. The fourth woman, by the way, having started in the 1970s with Margaret Thatcher, and they did so because her skills were rated highly, her political positioning won the support of the party base. Meritocracy, at least of a sort. Doesn't guarantee a win, but the opposite almost certainly guarantees a loss. One good thing for America is that all those people who were poised and ready to go into full throttle, spreading stories and innuendo, claiming the election was stolen, all fell silent very quickly. For the survival of America's democracy, this is a good thing. If Harris had won by the same margin, it would also have been fine, because all those claims and stories would have spread, but only the true believers would actually have believed them in that situation. But in a close election, with Democrats having pursued lawfare against Trump and with all the rhetoric, it might have been a lot easier for more people in the centre to fall for that narrative. As it was, we did still get an echo of it all because people have developed habits that are hard to kick. So some people were circulating the voting numbers and noting how much higher the voting number was for the previous election and suggesting that this proved the previous election must have been stolen. Well, no. This being America, a number of states haven't finished counting yet. Ones where the outcome isn't in doubt, like California, but millions of votes still need to be counted. If you go by the expected final numbers, it's slightly down this time, but only slightly. There have also been Democrats, fringe ones on Twitter to be fair, not significant figures within the actual party establishment, not that I've seen anyway, who were similarly taking those numbers and saying it suggested something fishy was going on and Kamala shouldn't have conceded. And no, it's the same response. Wait for the final tallies, don't be idiots, you lost, deal with it. It's what I said to Trump supporters, to their fury in 2020, is true for Harris supporters in 2024. At least it's only a Twitter fringe in their case, not the actual candidate. So what happens next? Well, the first and most obvious thing, pretty much all Trump's legal problems now just go away. The federal charges cannot be pursued, they just disappear. It is simply not going to happen that the president-elect or the sitting president, once he has been inaugurated, is going to be sent to jail by a state court. Trump gambled everything on this push for the White House. He won the gamble. Technically, the state prosecutions could defer trial or appeal until after he's completed his term. But since all the energy behind those trials was, let's face it, to seek to stop him from achieving exactly what he's just achieved, the most spectacular own goal in political history, of course, since his campaign only picked up momentum when the first charges were brought. Good job there. Anyway, it's pretty unlikely to happen. Going after an 82-year-old, two-term former president? Why would you do that? As for what else comes next, well, the media and YouTube commenters and everyone else, full of speculation. But it's just that. Speculation. The truth is, you simply don't know what Trump will actually decide to do, regardless of what he said he would do. I mean, he said Hillary Clinton would be in jail in 2016, then he laughed that off after the election. Since then, he's been pursued by Democrats trying to put him in jail, so we might expect some differences in how he responds this time, especially with at least 2 years of having a supportive Congress before the midterms. Other than that, I don't really see the point of lots of breathless, oh, he might do this, he might do that, type stuff. We'll find out in due course. In the UK, of course, we're mostly obsessed about our own stuff, and thereby interpreting Trump's victory in the light of it. So we have the Tory-supporting media who are delighting in rubbing the anguished left's noses in it, trying to embarrass Labour by calling attention to all of the figures, not least for Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who have said unpleasant things about Trump in the past. The fact is that if Trump goes ahead with universal tariffs, one of the things he's promised to do, that would damage the UK's interests. That is not part of their narrative just yet. And even if that happens, I expect they'll find a way to blame it on Keir Starmer or indeed David Lammy. Various people who made predictions have been either celebrating their awesome wisdom and seeking credit, or have been hounded as losers and wrong. The truth is, of course, that the vast majority of commentators and partisans simply predicted the thing they wanted to happen. It's not really prediction, it's just kind of the public expression of wishful thinking. If everyone does that, and it's a two-horse race, by definition, half of them are going to be right at the end, and the other half is going to be wrong. You can take credit for that if you must, but if all you did was predict that your favoured candidate would win, it's just kind of like winning a coin flip. Now, a small handful went against their preference. So, for example, Dominic Sandbrook from The Rest is History predicted a Trump win against his preference. On YouTube, friend of this channel, Vlad Vexler, did likewise, pointing out that the much vaunted 13 keys of Alan Lichtman seemed on the face of it to point more to a Trump victory than they did to what Lichtman said they did, which was a Harris victory. Personally, as a non-partisan observing a race that was polling as neck and neck, I did not participate in the prediction game, unlike Rory Stewart of the Rest is Politics podcast, who seemed to be getting more grief than anyone else in the UK for having, in rather exuberant terms, predicted a win for Kamala Harris that wouldn't even, he said, be close. Some of his critics were saying, "See, he knows absolutely nothing and should end his podcast, never to be heard from again." Ah, the hubris of the winners of the coin toss. Well, I'm sure Rory Stewart will get over it, and he still has thoughtful insights worth listening to, if, of course, you don't want to wholly be in an echo chamber. Now, I will make certain predictions based on what I know, or at least what I think I know. Trump's second term will be substantively different to the first. In the first couple of years, he will be more confident and less restrained, and that will have some pluses and also some big minuses. He will be taken more seriously by a number of foreign leaders, including those who hate everything he stands for, because last time they thought he was an almost accidental aberration. This time, he clearly represents the American people. Trump's delusions that he only has to inhabit the White House for the world's dictators to become too afraid to start or prosecute a war, that will not survive this second term. He will not solve the Ukraine war on his first day of taking office, or indeed within his first month. If called out on that, he'll just blame Zelensky. However, America's refusal to support Ukraine militarily will ultimately lead to Putin's partial victory based on some degree of the territory currently occupied. America will be seen by everyone as an unreliable ally because of that and various other transactional plays that Trump will make. Whether that matters or not, you can decide. Within the next 4 years, Trump will fall out with Robert Kennedy Jr., he will fall out with Elon Musk, he will not fall out with Susie Wiles, his new chief of staff. Why? Because she is above all else loyal to Trump, although she will tell him when she thinks he's wrong, which is exactly what he needs. She also does not seek fame, she does not seek credit, she does not seek the spotlight, unlike the walking egos on legs that are Kennedy and Musk. Trump cannot bear people getting ideas above themselves and seeking to be famous in his orbit. Kennedy will not survive. Musk will not survive. It will take a while, perhaps, but they won't reach the end of the 4-year term on good terms. Musk and the other tech bros who have been throwing money at him did so thinking that they could influence him, manipulate him, take the edge off his craziness, benefit financially from him. Will Musk persuade Trump not to dismantle America's scientific institutions? Will others? Will they even try when push comes to shove? Lots of people think they can manipulate Trump. We're going to learn which ones can and which ones are kidding themselves. President Putin thinks that he's another one. He's already been handing out generous praise to Trump's courage and his success, all the flattery that Trump is known to be susceptible to, and talking about how Trump's plan for ending the Ukraine war deserves to be taken seriously, says Putin. But it doesn't mean, he has added, that he will accept any abandonment of his territorial ambitions. And of course, neither is Ukraine going to accept giving up territory, so it's hard to see what Trump actually practically does about that, except withdraw involvement and let it go to Putin by default. What Putin will be seeking as well will be Trump's allyship in his rehabilitation in the wider global community. If America drops its sanctions, if Trump and Putin meet for a summit, Putin will have made another step in normalizing himself and his armed aggression against neighbours as a tool of statecraft. I won't predict whether he'll get his wish, but it's undoubtedly true that the opportunity exists, depending on how he manages to play his cards. All right, that's enough for now. Whatever the next 4 years bring, I think the safest prediction of all is to say that they won't be boring.